Hi everyone, I'm Sayel Filias, the Program Learning and Development Specialist at CERIC. And on behalf of all the CERIC team, I would like to welcome you back to week 3 of our webinar series, Using Research for Evidence-Informed Career Development Practice. Today is the last webinar of the series, and Lolene Burdal will discuss how to conduct research in your career development practice. But before starting, I would like to invite you one more time to acknowledge the territory from which you are learning today. I'm speaking with you from our CERIC office located in Toronto, the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Petun, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Mississauga Anishinaabe of New Credit people. We are grateful to have this opportunity to learn together one more time on this land today. Now, just a few reminders for today's webinar, and you must know by now, but you can interact with Lolene and ask your question or share comments at any time in the question section. We'll have a Q&A where we will address all of your questions at the end of the webinar. Note also that we'll send you the recording of today's webinar along with all the 3 recording and presentation slides in the next 24 hours. And our presenter made available handouts that you can download from the handout section and which you can use for note-taking throughout today's webinar. Finally, today's being the last webinar of this series, you will have a pop-up survey at the end of the webinar. So please take just a few minutes to let us know what you thought of this series and what are your future learning needs. We greatly value your feedback, so thank you in advance for your answer. But with all that, I'm happy to pass it now over to you, Lolene, to do your third and final presentation. So over to you, Lolene.
Well, thank you and welcome everyone. And thank you very much for coming back. It's amazing that we're at the 3rd week already. It's also amazing that it is June. So I'm in beautiful Saskatoon, and it's absolutely gorgeous here. And I hope that it is similarly beautiful wherever you are at. So today we are talking about conducting research in your career development practice. And so just to do a bit of a recap, many of you, I believe, have been at the past 2 sessions, but if not, the very first session was a research foundation of Research 101, I called it, sort of giving an introduction to what we mean by research, what we mean by evidence, and the idea of the evidence continuum that we keep coming back to. Last week, we did looking at existing research, so that's research that other people have done and published and made available for your career development practice, looked at how you can locate studies, access these studies, and read this research with a critical and thoughtful approach. So if you missed either of those 2, please be sure to check out the recordings. Today we are in our final session and we're looking at how you can conduct research in your own career development practice, looking at how you can use existing data sources, how you can collect your own data, and how you might be able to bridge the practitioner-researcher gap. So just to go over our learning outcomes, by the end of today's webinar, you should be able to identify strategies to locate existing data sources that are relevant to your work. You should be able to discuss the challenges that CDPs can face in conducting original research and some possible approaches to address these challenges. Understand opportunities to bridge the practitioner-researcher gap, plan ahead to share your research findings with others, and reflect on opportunities to advance evidence-informed approaches to your own work. Now, one thing you'll notice that's not on these learning outcomes is I'm not going to, in a 60-minute webinar, teach you how to actually do primary or original research if you've never done it before. I'm going to talk to you about some ways that if you haven't done it, you might be able to move forward in that direction. But I think one thing to be really aware of is that doing research is its own level of expertise. You're not going to pick it up in a 60-minute webinar, but I'm going to point you to some directions on how you might be able to move forward, including if you want to develop that expertise for yourself. So last week I talked about how there's different ways to engage with research. So one way, and I've got them colored the same colors as a stoplight, just to sort of give us that sort of same sense of caution. Green light, excellent, everybody go. So this is published research. You need to be able to engage critically and thoughtfully with this research, but the risk level is fairly low. Secondary data analysis, and we'll talk about what that is, but this is using data, information, evidence that other people have collected. It has a bit more caution to it than the published research, so I've got that one in yellow. You need to be able to locate the data, which is its own skill. You need to be able to analyze and interpret the data, and this is a particular skill that that you want to be very conscious of, and be able to use that research responsibly. And we're going to talk about all those points today. Primary data collection and analysis, I've got this in red because this is the most challenging part of it. This is the part where you want to be very cautious to make sure that you or your team have the expertise that you need. So you need the time and funding to do the work, and you need the expertise in terms of research design to do the work. You need the ability to collect data ethically, and this is a large concern when we're doing research. You need to be able to analyze and interpret data and be able to use the information responsibly as well. And so we're going to spend a little bit more time on the secondary data analysis. Primary data collection analysis we will touch on, but as I said, this is an area where I'm going to encourage you to, if you're planning to go in this direction, sort of think through how you might best be able to do so. The reason I'm having these cautions, and I'm not saying everybody go out and do your own primary data and just have at it, is that we want to make sure that when we're using evidence that we are doing so in the best possible way. So across all three of these webinars, I've been talking about this evidence continuum, and you'll recall at one end of the continuum is misleading evidence. So this is research that has strong design flaws, and it's a real problem in that it can be, especially if you don't know what those flaws are, you can have misleading or inappropriate results that can spin you off in the wrong direction, and that can actually be worse than having no evidence at all. And so because of that, I really encourage us to make sure that that we're working at things that that are sort of to the best of our abilities. So I'm going to start with secondary data and locating secondary data, working with existing data to inform your work. And just when I spoke last week about working with existing studies, and I mentioned that it was important that that these studies be credible, accessible, and relevant to your work. It's the same thing with existing secondary data. You want to make sure that it is credible, that it is accessible to you, and that it's relevant to your work. So secondary data, what on earth is she talking about? Well, secondary data are data that are not collected directly by the researcher, but made available for others to use. So there's a number of different types of secondary data, and as academics, we make strong use of secondary data ourselves. So this is a very important source of knowledge. One form of secondary data is official statistics. And so these are statistics that are collected by governments, by international organizations. They're released to the public in different ways for use. So a great example of this would be Statistics Canada data in Canada. Statistics Canada data is collected in a number of different ways. Sometimes it's through administrative data, sometimes it's through population-based research, such as the census. But these are data sets that are very robust and put out as a form of public service. And so those would be our official statistics. Secondary survey data are, so a survey is like a public opinion poll. We often think of this in terms of market research and so on. So these are public opinion data sets that are designed and compiled by others. So in Canada, we have the Canada Election Study. There's something called the World Values Survey. There's these Eurobarometers for Europe, Afrobarometer for Africa. There's a wealth of secondary data sets that are made available for use. And so, these things can be very valuable, and I'll make mention of some. And then there's other forms of secondary data that are out there. There might be administrative data forms that you have access to. There's sort of a whole world of secondary data. The point to keep in mind about secondary data is that you're not collecting the data yourself. You're not designing the study yourself. Someone else has done that work, and then you have, through whatever means it is, access to that data set. And there's a number of real advantages to secondary data. So, if you can imagine the amount of, for those of you who are familiar with research, there's a lot of work that is involved with a research study. And so with the research, you need to design the research. You may need to make sure that you have a robust research design that pays attention to a number of different questions in terms of measurement, in terms of sampling. We talked about a number of these things in the Research 101 webinar. And if you're using secondary data, you need to be conscious of these things, you need to be aware of them, but you're actually not making those choices. Someone else, usually someone with a great amount of expertise in the area, is already making those choices. So you don't have to do that. The other research, that research team is responsible for making sure that the research is conducted in ethical ways. If it's done through universities or official agencies, they need to obtain particular ethics approvals, all those sorts of things. Those are things that you as a user of these data don't need to worry about, which is great. Another thing that's a real advantage is that you don't need to pay. So typically, either the data are free to use, or they are of a relatively low cost to use compared to if you had to pay for the data collection, pay for the time, pay for the software use, all of those things, data cleaning. Sometimes there can be errors in data, and these things are all sort of taken care of. So there's real time savings, there's real money savings that can be realized by using secondary data sets. Another real advantage with secondary data is that they can have a real breadth of topics and amount of information that's available, and a real quality of information. So one thing that, for those of you who aren't familiar with Statistics Canada data, if you sort of wade into the websites, it's a real surprise how much information they have, and the range of topics that are covered. So one thing, I will say, and I haven't been on the site in a little bit, the Statistics Canada website, and I say this with love, isn't always, I think it could be a little bit more user-friendly. This was a number of years ago, but someone from Statistics Canada joked with me that their website is deliberately less than user-friendly to make sure people really want the information. She was just kidding, but there was sort of a ring of truth in this. So you want to give yourself some time to wait around that website if you're in there, but an amazing array of studies that are available to inform your work. Official statistics, they usually have a really strong attention to data quality, and so they've got teams of statisticians, teams of data experts that put this information together. Same thing with secondary survey data sets. Not always, but generally speaking, the big ones, the big names, in terms of survey research, will be conducted with teams that pay a lot of attention to research design, a lot of attention to how questions are constructed and pre-tested, and how samples are constructed to sort of address issues of representativeness and bias. And so there's a real real high level of quality. So you can sort of look at it and you can be like, okay, well, I don't have to have the expertise to design studies and to do all that. I don't have to spend the money to collect the data, and I don't have to put the time in to collect the data. So really, a lot of real advantages to using secondary data. So I'd like to talk specifically about two types of secondary data that I think might be of use to you. So the first is official statistics. And so official statistics, the ones I find quite useful for work, electoral returns data that might not be of particular interest to career development practice. For me as a political scientist, it's of great interest. But there's also government administrative data. So for example, Statistics Canada, when it puts together certain crime data, will have information that's taken from police units across the country, or higher education data would be administrative data that's provided by post-secondary institutions across the country, and so on. And then there's also survey-based data. So the census, and so all of you are probably very familiar with the census. It is a full population survey, and so it goes out to the population. There's a number of survey-based data sets that are in Statistics Canada data, and these are examples of official statistics. Some great things about official statistics, some that I've talked to a bit already: the efficiency and cost, the breadth and quality. Two other things I'll mention in terms of the advantages is official statistics can have very, very large samples, things that as academic researchers we wouldn't even dream of being able to access. So obviously the census, that's a full population study. They aren't able to access the entirety of the population, but they get very, very large samples, and they've got ways to try to get around issues of representativeness that as academic researchers we would not have access to. For example, if you don't complete your census, you can face a penalty as a citizen, and so that's something that we see a response rate that we wouldn't see elsewhere. A large sample population. So there's some survey-based official statistics that have 6, 7, 10, 20,000 respondents. That's amazing. And so because of that, that means that then you can do analyses on smaller and smaller groups. I'm interested in this particular issue, but specific to women, and specific to women in a particular city. And you can drill down and still have a large enough sample to be able to draw some pretty strong conclusions from that. I've also got their change over time. And so one thing we're often interested in is not just, well, what's going on in 2022, but how does that compare to 2018, and how does that compare to 2014? A number of the official statistics have data sets have that tracking over time, which can be incredibly valuable. Some of the negatives, just to be aware of, one is that the variables included or excluded might not be the exact ones you want, because someone other than you was designing the study. They don't know exactly what your needs are, and so sometimes it's like, oh, they've got 6 of the 8 things I wanted. Why don't they have the other 2? And that's just that's the way life is sometimes, and so that can be a bit of a challenge. Another thing to be aware of is aggregated data. And so what sometimes will happen is they will present the data in a way that's specific to a geographic area, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But you might not be able to tease things out the way you wanted to. I also have note there, caution with comparative data, and I'll talk about that in just a moment as well. But sometimes the way, for example, Canada defines a term and measures something might not be the same way they do it in the United States or Australia. And so if we're not careful, we can be making these comparisons that we think are true comparisons, but they're actually not, and they're actually misleading. So this is an area that we want to have caution. So I mentioned just a moment ago that official statistics can sometimes be presented in aggregate data. So aggregate data are these grouped data for a specific geographic area. So I'll give an example. I live in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. You know, there might be data specific to Saskatoon. And that might be the only way I can get the data, is that, you know, it's sort of lumped together for Saskatoon. This is different than a data set where the researcher can look at things much more at an individual basis. And so for those of you who are familiar with working with data sets, you know, there's the rows, that's each individual case, and then there's the column that is each individual variable, and you can sort of run data in different ways. Quite often it's hard to be able to access that microdata. So Statistics Canada has these units across Canada called research data centers, and they do have this microdata that's available for people to make use of, but because of privacy laws and everything, you can't just sort of walk in and access the data. You have to fill out applications in order to be able to use the information with sort of why you want to use the information. You have to have sort of different privacy screenings and things like that. And so that can be, I mentioned before, we have questions of access. And so, you know, the data might be there and they might be relevant to your work, and, you know, it's highly credible, it's Statistics Canada data, but you might not be able to get it because you don't have access to the actual data set. So that can be something just to be aware of. Another thing, though, is because you're working with aggregated data and you can't sort of drill down to that individual level, is you have to be cautious in interpreting these data. So there's something that's called the ecological fallacy, and this is the assumption that sometimes people can make, and, you know, we have these sort of jumps that we can make in our thinking, but this assumption that group level patterns imply individual level patterns. And so I'll give an example of, so let's say you have a geographic area. I mentioned Saskatoon. Let's say Saskatoon has a people that have a particular characteristic. Let's say I'll use, you know, Saskatoon is at the federal level. There's a lot of conservative voting, and so if you look at the electoral returns, you know, we've got all these conservative seats. You might then say, okay, well, based on that, people in Saskatoon are conservative. So there's this assumption that this group level pattern is applying to individuals, and, you know, that's true of some of the groups, but not all. And so we have to make sure that we're not sort of translating what's known about a group to ascribing that to all individuals in a group. And so we want to just be careful in thinking that through. I also mentioned the issue of being cautious with comparative official statistics, and so countries can use similar terms, and you know, there's different countries will provide their data, and these are what go into international official statistics. But the data quality can really vary across countries. The data definitions can vary slightly, and so, you know, again, we just want to be very cautious in making sure what we're doing has true comparisons. So because of this, as we use official statistics, as we use this form of secondary data, we want to make sure that we're doing so ethically and we're doing so responsibly. And what this means is we need to take a careful look at what is known as the metadata. And so the metadata is simply the technical documentation that accompanies secondary data. So if any of you have had a chance to look at Statistics Canada data, if you dig into that website, there will be these large reports of information that discusses how the data set was put together. It'll explain what the population was, and if there was a sample, it will explain that. It'll explain the time frame. It'll explain how they're defining all these different concepts and so on. As you're using data, it's your responsibility to become familiar with that information and be aware of it. And I say this because it's so tempting not to. I'm not going to lie, this metadata documentation, it's not going to be the most exciting thing you've ever read in your life. You'll be flipping through it and or scrolling through it online, and you'll be like, okay, but you still need to be familiar with it because sometimes it has in there information that you really need to be careful about. It'll have these data cautions. So I've got an example up here from 2009 that is sort of one of those important to be careful about details. So they wrote that year, caution should be exercised in analyzing trends for Aboriginal peoples based on previous census data. Over time, patterns in Aboriginal self-identification have changed. In recent years, a growing number of people who had not previously identified with an Aboriginal group are now doing so. Changes in the participation of First Nations people living on reserve in the census over time also affect historical comparison. So what they're saying is that there's been something important that has gone on in measurement and how people are responding to a question that is changing what the outcome is. If you didn't know this, you might look and you'd be like, wow, look at this. We've seen this massive boom in the language that was used at the time was Aboriginal population. Now we'd say Indigenous populations, and you might think, wow, there's maybe there's been a big baby boom or something like that. And it's like, well, no, this is a self-reporting. This is how people are self-identifying, and there's been a change in that. And so reading the technical documentation, if it says there's a caution about data, you want to sort of be aware of that in your work, and that's your responsibility as a user of that information. And of course, you always want to appropriately cite the source when you're using official statistics. Really exciting for all of you who are working in career development. You're likely interested in labor market information, and I was as I was sort of putting together this presentation, I was like, I wonder how accessible these data are, and I was very excited to see that that these data are about to become much more accessible to all of you. So there's this new LMIC data hub that is launching this fall. I'm going to knock wood because hopefully they're doing well with their timelines, and they're going to be making these data tools and available for career planning and guidance. And so this is going to be a really exciting thing for career development in research in Canada. So please be sure to check that out. Secondary survey data sets, like I said, what we're talking about here is public opinion surveys, and the data sets are made available to people. And so again, you see a number of positives that we've talked about already. These are also true for secondary survey data sets. They're efficient and cost effective. They often are very good quality, have a lot of questions that might be of interest to you. Sometimes they can be comparative across different countries. Sometimes they can be comparative over time when they replicate surveys and so on. And sometimes the downside is that they've got some questions you want and some that are missing. And you're like, why didn't you include that question? again, that's just life. I do a lot of survey research myself. I also make a lot of use of secondary survey data, and it can be very very exciting when you find a survey that has the information you want. And you're like, well, how does the public feel about this issue? And then you find the data set and you're like, wow, that was easy. And so that can be great. One source that you might want to see if you can get access to and take a look through is based out of Queen's University. It's the Canadian Opinion Research Archive, what's known as CORA. So you can just Google that, and then you can search the site and look for different questions, different topics that might be available, and play around with that information. As you can see from here, they've got data sets going back to the 1970s. And as researchers, what often we will do is we'll collect data, we'll do our academic publishing out of it, and then we're like, okay, we're done with this, and we just donate the data set for other people to use through Cora. So this can be a great resource for you as well. To use secondary survey data ethically, same things that we saw before. You want to pay attention to the metadata. You want to be looking at this technical documentation. In particular, you're wanting to understand what the sample is. So surveys are based on samples of the population. We talked about that in the very first webinar of this webinar series. So you want to understand what the sample is and how the sampling was done. Was this an online survey? Was this a telephone survey? What were the response rates? You want to get a sense of what that is. You also want to understand the survey questionnaire, and a couple of things to be aware of there is you want to get the full question wording, and so that can be you want to know what was the exact wording of the question, what were the response options that the respondents were given to select from. You want to look at the order of the questions. So the questions that come before other survey questions can slightly influence what the results are. So if you had a whole bunch of questions about, I'm just trying to think of something, sort of the value of voting. So let's say we had a whole bank of questions. The respondent is asked about, how important is voting to democracy, and do people have a duty to vote, and all of this. And then you have a question of, oh, and did you vote in the most recent election? That's going to prime people to want to say, yes, I did, even if they didn't. Either they're wanting to sort of save face because they just said voting's valuable, and then they don't want to say they didn't vote, or they misremember because there's a lot of, they meant to. And so, you want to have a good sense of the ordering of questions. Skip patterns, sometimes if people answered one way to a question, then it skips them to a later part of a survey. You just want to know what's going on with that survey, and that's part of your responsibility. You want to also be sure that you're appropriately citing the survey. I can say, as someone who has put together survey research, it's a tremendous amount of work. You have to, first of all, get the money for the survey. You have to design it, all of this. So, if you're using somebody else's survey, you want to cite them appropriately in your work in using so. Regardless, so you're using secondary data, either official statistics, secondary survey data, or other forms of secondary data. You want to be aware of the cognitive biases that we talked about last week. And so you'll recall that as humans, we tend to attribute more expertise to those findings that are consistent with our pre-existing beliefs and less to those that are inconsistent with our pre-existing beliefs. We tend to cherry pick, and we tend to be, completely unreasonable with anything that goes against our pre-existing beliefs. And so as we're working with secondary data, we want to be aware of the fact that we're humans, we're going to have these natural human reactions. So what this means is that we need to be thoughtful and careful when we use secondary data. So carefully considering the source, first of all, who's the team, who put together these data sets? want to be reviewing that metadata and making sure we're understanding the limitations, the strengths, the weaknesses of any data set. And recall that all research has its flaws, and there's no perfect study, and we just want to be aware of what the limitations are. And you want to be really careful in watching your desire to cherry pick. You find some data and then you expect one thing, and then you look and it's different than you expected, and there'll be part of you that wants to be like, didn't see that, and you want to sort of watch that sort of tendency in yourself, and really question yourself as you go along. So I'm just going to pause for a moment here, and I'm going to ask all of you to with pen and paper or typing, if that's your preference, is to think about how you might like to use secondary data to inform your work, and also what actions you might take to move these forward. And so I've got some examples here. You might want to look at demographic profile information for your grant applications. If that's what you want, then you might want to go explore the census data on the Statistics Canada website and see what might be available for you. They have some amazing profiles based on geographic locations that might be of use to you. You might want to get a sense of public attitudes towards the importance of post-secondary education funding, or public attitudes towards the future of work, whatever the case might be. And then you might want to go dig around and look on Quora or other sources for relevant public opinion surveys. Or you might want to create a labor market profile for your area. And so then you might want to keep watch for when that LMIC data hub launches. So I'm just going to give you a moment here to write down some things that you would like to do to inform your work. If you're willing, please type what you would like to do with secondary data into the question box. We'd love to know what your plans are on this front. Just give you a moment there. Being quiet is not my strength. I'll just give you 30 more seconds. Again, please feel free to pop it into the question box. All right, I'm going to carry on. Primary research. I said I would talk about it, but I wouldn't actually teach you how to do it because that would be impossible for me to do in a 30-minute webinar. But I want to talk about some of the challenges that career development practitioners can face in conducting primary or original research. So one real challenge is subject matter expertise, and sort of having that deep knowledge in a particular area might be a challenge for some people. Actual research expertise in terms of the data collection or the data analysis can be a challenge. You know, how do you construct the studies? How do you make sure that they're valid and reliable, and that they have good samples? All these types of things can be a real challenge. Time and money. We're all short on those, and those can be a real challenge for a lot of people. And also ethics, understanding the ethics that are involved in doing research can be something that people can really struggle with. There's the tri-agencies in Canada, so the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, the National Science Research Council of Canada, and the Canadian Institute of Health Research, that together they're known as the tri-agencies. They have something called, it's like a research ethics policy statement, and it lays out the ethical guidelines for conducting research in Canada. And this is a massive document for human subject research. And so, being familiar with all of this is something that people don't necessarily have expertise in. So what do you do? There's three possible solutions for you that I'd like to mention. The first is to hire research out. So you might want to contract with a consulting firm. You might want to contract with an academic, with a think tank, or a nonprofit with expertise in these areas. But one option is just to find somebody who knows what they're doing and have them help you. That can be an easy way. Another thing is to build partnerships. And so you might say, okay, well, we don't have this expertise. This group does, and we're going to find ways to work together and to sort of bring our work together to meet this. Build internal capacity. You might decide, you know what, we don't have somebody who has this research capacity, but we're going to need it, and so we're going to create a position. We're going to hire somebody and have somebody who has this particular knowledge. And then finally, connect with experts. You might be like, well, we'd like this information, we'd like this type of expertise, and we're going to see what we can do to create these connections to help us move forward. A lot of the experts that you might be wanting to engage with are sitting and working in academia, and there's a large body of research out there about the fact that we've got this real gap between academia on the one side that has this expertise, practitioners on the other side that would really benefit from this expertise, and there's this gap between them, and it's often referred to as the practitioner-academic divide. Paul Posner writes, the cooperation between academia and practitioners is beset by tensions between the very different institutional incentives, ways of thinking, and traditions of universities and public agencies. So there's people out there who have this information, and sort of figuring out ways to connect can be a real challenge. At the same time, there's a lot of strategies that have been identified that can really help. So this was an article that I found from last year that sort of looked at different strategies, ways that practitioners and academics can really come together. This might be through teaching, as you see through points 1 through 5 there. It might be through facilitated collaboration. We see those under the points 4. Or it might be through different types of knowledge exchange. So there's a lot of ways that these connections can be fostered. And I invite you to take a look at the slides, at the handouts, and look at these different options. I think when you seek to make connections with people in academia, it's really valuable to think through what's reasonable to suggest and ask for as you make these connections. And so I've got 4 points here that I'd suggest for all of you. The first is to be really clear on what you can offer to academics. So you're not just sort of going up to somebody and being like, "Hi, how are you doing? Can you do a whole bunch of free work for me?" That generally doesn't go well with anybody. Academics, like everybody else, are dealing with increasing workloads and time pressures and demands and expectations. So be sort of clear in terms of, well, what could you do to make this sort of a mutually beneficial relationship? Are there ways that you could help with their teaching in terms of classroom talks, or that your agency might be a site for their own research? There's a number of different research grants that are out there that deliberately want to develop partnerships and develop connections. So as I mentioned, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, CERIC, it has a number of different things that tries to connect academics and the broader community, partnership grants, connection grants. So this might be something that is a point where you could talk to somebody in academia and be like, hey, if you're looking in this direction, I'd love to talk about this. MyTax is a program that looks at training students and having them have sort of this real world work opportunity. Perhaps your organization might be a site for this type of work that academics might be interested in. I think as well, when you talk to somebody, when you approach somebody in academia, you want to be really reasonable about what you're requesting. If you're looking at a partnership, what exactly are you bringing to the table? If you're looking at consulting, what are you expecting to pay for that? If you're looking for unpaid service, what kind of demands are on that? Is that like an advisory committee where you're just wanting their feedback for a couple of hours, or are you asking for something more? I recently, earlier this year, I was talking to a very junior faculty member a, a a group that a lot of people want a lot of representation from, and she mentioned that she'd done this talk for a group, and she was given something like a $50 honorarium, and I said, well, how much time was it? And she said, oh, well, it was 2 hours. And I said, well, no, how much time was it once you put all the preparation into it? And she spent like 10 hours preparing for this 2-hour talk. And it's like, well, my kid who works at as a grocery teller is getting paid a heck of a lot more. This was service, and I think we need to be mindful of what we're asking of people in terms of unpaid work and unpaid service, and if this is a fair thing to request. So just be very mindful of that. So once you're really clear on what you can offer, what you're really clear on what you are requesting, I think then you want to make a list of possible academics who are involved in the area. And I'll ask you as you do so to be mindful of the career stage of who you are thinking of approaching. So in academia, there's a number of different career stages. Assistant professors are typically individuals who are new in their roles and they're working towards tenure. And in working towards tenure, they have a really strong focus on academic publishing. It might not be in their interest to be doing this type of work, depending on what their field is, and so they might not be as interested in engaging. They might be. I can't say that they're not, but I'm just saying that they might be. They have a very clear target in mind. Associate professors, they have tenure. They're sort of mid-career. They might be a bit more open to these kinds of engagements. Full professors have sort of reached the top of the promotional scale in academia, and it's possible they would be even more open to this. And so it's just something to be mindful of. I'm not saying not to approach anyone who's an assistant professor. They might be completely excited by this, but if they're don't don't take offense. It's just everybody's got their own priorities that they have to deal with. And then the last thing I'd say is once you know who you want to talk to, you know what you want to be able to offer, and what you might want to request is just find a way to talk to people. You could conduct what's referred to as an informational interview, where you might be like, you might email somebody and say, hey, I'm working in this agency and this is what we do. And I know that you have a particular expertise in this area. I was wondering if we could chat for 20 minutes on a Zoom call, and I could just let you know what our agency is, and see if there's any points where we might be able to work together. And let's say you contact 5 people and 2 of them agree to talk to you, and then you might find that you have opportunities to work together. You might not. Great, you've built that network at the very least. And then you can always at the end of the discussion just say, hey, who else is working in this area? Who should I talk to? And it's referred to as snowball sampling. And so the idea here is you start with a small snowball and let it roll down the hill, and it grows over time. And that's a way that you can really build your connections and network with people working in academia. And that might be an opportunity for you to build your team to be able to engage with primary research. Last thing is whether you're using primary research or primary data collection or secondary data collection, there's that question of planning ahead to share research with others. And so, you know, as we do work, it can be valuable to share information as other people can benefit from it. You can benefit from sharing it with other people because they give you feedback, ask you questions, challenge you to think about things in a different way. And so there's a number of ways to share your research. One very exciting way is conferences, and so right now you are we're participating in a CERIC webinar. CERIC sponsors a very large conference every year, and so I've got the the call for presenters up right now. So you've got till June 17th. So if you're doing research right now or working with primary or secondary data, and you're like, hey, it'd be really cool to share this, you can submit your proposal before June 17th there. Webinars and talks are another way to share information and research. Publicly accessible reports. So you might put something, you might have a report that you put together and then you put it up on your website. As you'll recall from last week, this would count as gray literature. You might want to submit it for a peer-reviewed journal article and go through that process. Or there might be other ways that you're aware of that you could engage. Podcasts are an increasingly popular way to share information. So you know, just think through how you're going to share that information with others. Couple things to keep in mind when you do share information. So research reports, whether it's a written report or whether it's some kind of presentation, webinar, conference presentation, whatever it is, they're arguments. They might just seem like they are sort of, here's just the presentation of information, but they're really arguments. They're arguments that the evidence that is being presented is credible, and it's an argument that the evidence that is being presented supports the conclusion. And last week when I talked about using other people's research, I asked you when you're reading research to make that assessment yourself of if that other person's evidence is credible, and to make that assessment yourself of if the other person's evidence supports their conclusion. Now that you're in the other role, it's your job to make sure that your audience, whoever is consuming the information that you're putting out, has sufficient information to be able to make those same assessments themselves. They need to be able to assess the quality of the evidence. They need to be able to see the link between your evidence and the arguments that you are making. So you just want to be very mindful of that. Last reflection point, and we'll just take a minute here, and that is I'd ask you just to write down, where are there opportunities for you to advance evidence-informed approaches to your own work, and what's an easy first step? So please write that down for yourself, and if you're willing to share, please put that into the question box. So I'll just give you a moment to do that. And while you are, I'm just going to ask you to do a little bit of a self-assessment. You can also do this after the webinar, so this is in the handouts. But I'd just like you to think through, how can you locate existing data sources relevant to your work? Where are some places you might look? Second question, what are the challenges career development practitioners can face in conducting original research? And what are some ways to address these challenges? Third question, how can CDPs bridge the researcher practitioner gap? How can you share your research findings with others? And then finally, what are the opportunities to advance evidence-informed approaches in your own work? I realize that I've gone through those a bit quickly, so I encourage you to take some time later and give these a bit of thought. So with that, I'm going to just share my information here. If you want to connect with me, I encourage you to. I've got a newsletter that you're welcome to take a look at. You can find me on Twitter and you can find me on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put those into the question box. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Lolene. Thank you very much for the third and amazing presentation. And yeah, it's time for Q&A. So please go ahead and ask your question on the question box. I just want to start by sharing that we received great comment and reflection exercise. A lot of people are planning to use the secondary data to inform or build their knowledge on LMIC. Some of them are already bookmark the link that you shared, so that's great.
Oh, excellent.
And I also like a comment when you were talking about, making connection and someone saying that actually career practitioners can also help researcher in their work. So I like that. So yeah, let's take a few questions for the next few minutes. Maybe we can start with Lina actually asking regarding primary research. Are survey of clients an example of primary research? And what type of skills does an organization need to do good surveys?
Excellent question. So yes, a survey of clients would be primary research. So you're collecting it yourself. In terms of conducting a good survey, there's a whole body of literature on this. Basically, you'd want to know how to design good quality survey questions, and so there's real challenges with survey question design that you want to make sure that you have questions that are providing response options that aren't overlapping with each other, that they're not missing particular categories, that they're not sort of misleading or biased in particular directions. We want to be able to be aware of how response rates work, all of these things. And so that, yes, I think one thing I find that's a bit of a challenge is that there can be a sense, because we can all go do our survey with SurveyMonkey, or we can use Google Forms or whatever the thing might, Qualtrics, whatever it is, that surveys are easy. They're certainly easy to put together, but it's also very easy, very easy to design a bad survey. And so some of you might be like, oh no, that's kind of scary, but it's true. And my concern there is that then people are conducting surveys and are then using poor quality evidence in order to inform their decisions. So I'd say if you are conducting client surveys or any kind of survey, it's your responsibility to then sort of educate yourself in terms of survey design. And there's a lot of tools that are out there. I wrote a piece for CareerWise that had links to a number of different MOOCs that people could take to build their skills with basic research. I have a class that I have taught here at the University of Saskatchewan, where the videos that I put up for it are all open access, so people could just watch those if you want even more of me talking. You know, there's different sources out there, but I would really encourage everybody, if you are doing things such as client surveys, to not just assume that you can just plug things in and have a good survey. You can have a survey, but you want to make sure that that you are doing so in a knowledgeable way.
Thank you so much, Lillian. Thanks. Maybe we have, time just for an additional questions. It was a question regarding making connection actually with academics. So is it best to make connection with local academics, or can we contact academics anywhere?
Oh, excellent question. So I would say it's great to connect with local academics because they might just have a more natural affinity to wanting to connect with people in their own community. And at the same time, if your work goes broader, or if there's someone with expertise outside your own area, absolutely feel free to connect with whoever it might be. I would suggest, like, sort of like if I got connect, I'm based, as I mentioned, I'm based in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. So if I'm connected with someone from Saskatoon were to connect with me, I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. You know, that's the community I'm engaged with. Someone in Saskatchewan, still interested. Someone in Canada, still interested. But as things go out, sort of my level of connection kind of drops. If someone's contacting me and they're from another country, I might be like, you know, that's kind of interesting, but it kind of gets further and further away from my own areas of interest. And so it might be a good idea to sort of start local and then snowball out.
Thank you, Lillian. And unfortunately, that was the last question we can take for today. Let me tell you, everyone, thank you so much for your great engagement over the series, and all your comments and reflection exercise will be shared one more time with Lillian. Lillian, thank you so much, so much for these wonderful webinar series. I will also make sure to forward you all the great comments we received on the quality of your presentation. I feel that over the past 3 weeks, you have walked us through the learning journey on research by starting, you know, helping us build on or refresh our learning for some of us on the basic of research, and then you know, understanding how we can use existing research in the second webinar, and finally today how we can conduct research and make connection. So I hope that by now our participants feel more equipped or more comfortable doing their research, and realize that they should have already done research in their work. Or for those who don't feel that they have the resources to do research, that they can actually do connection, including with CERIC, and you refer us to all of our participants. So thank you again, Lillian. CERIC is here if you have you know, project. We accept letter of intent, and we do found a research project. So Lillian, thank you so much for this series and for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us.
Thank you.
And if I may, just before officially closing the series, I just want to share a couple of news with you all in case you are interested in. So CERIC is actually currently updating his Canadian Career Development Researcher database for you to know who is doing what research in Canada. So make sure you stay tuned with CERIC news to be informed when our database will be finalized. And another CERIC news you might want to know is that you have now less than 2 weeks to answer our call for presenter for Connexus 23. So we hope you will submit. So with these two news, I just want to say that you may want to make sure to subscribe to our CERIC updates if not done yet. So by subscribing to our newsletters, you can get update on the release of our research database, on reminder for Connexus 2023 conference, as well as any notification on news on upcoming learning opportunities. But for now, let me close by thanking you once again, Lillian, and thank you all for your great engagement over the series. And I hope you will just take a couple of minutes to let us know what you thought of the series in the survey that will just pop up on your screen. And we'll see you all at another learning opportunity very soon. Have a good day.